We're excited to have so many of you join us this morning as we think differently about everyday ethical challenges in the workplace. I'm Dr. Cheryl Richards. I'm the CEO and president of Catapult, your employers association. At Catapult, we strive to make everyday operational challenges easy on you, our members, by providing you with the confidence to navigate through those challenges so you can make your workplaces more effective and your employees more successful. We do this because we strive to accelerate a world of exceptional workplaces where you have engaged people who help you drive your business success. Last month, in our Thinking Differently series, we focused on culture. And culture is extremely important when you think about an organization's core values and how those values drive the business. At Catapult, our core values focus on innovation, integrity, community, excellence, and service. Service to you, our members, and our non-members to make your lives easier as you navigate the complex world of human resources and people. Today's session is on everyday ethical challenges. You know that the world of work is complicated. It's easy to get caught up in ethical dilemmas even without realizing that you're headed that way. Today's session, we have two experts joining us from Catapult. We'll talk about common ethical challenges that HR and people professionals have to deal with daily. From the obvious ones, things like discrimination and harassment, to those that are less obvious around conflicts of interest, kickbacks, and maybe even ethics of dealing with customers. We'll talk through some scenarios with our expert and help provide insight as to what is ethical and how HR can help your organization understand your best practices. Without further ado, let me introduce our two experts at Catapult. Kirsten Laura is Vice President of Learning and Development, and Renee Watkins is a familiar face. She is one of our true experts, our HR advisors that provides everyday expertise and guidance to our members at Catapult. So Kirsten and Renee, please allow me to let you take it away from here.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I am so glad that you emphasized that Renee is the expert here, because I am so excited to get to listen and learn a little bit from her. So today, I'm super excited to be talking with you, Renee, because I want to learn more about the types of ethical challenges that HR professionals face every day. I've gotten more and more interest in ethics for credits from our HR professionals from a learning perspective. But we also are hearing more about it from a training perspective, right? It seems like people are more stressed and there's just more ethical issues that are happening. And we see a lot of diversity and anti-harassment and workplace laws classes to really try and help employees and managers understand respect, responsibility, what is ethical behavior. And I think we always think about the obvious issues, discrimination and harassment, but there's so many other situations that we face each week, and our members come and ask questions about it and want to know how to handle. And I can't wait to talk through some of these with you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and thanks for Cheryl for that very nice welcome. You know, it's true, we hear from members about all kinds of workplace issues every single day. Some of the concerns are pretty obvious, but others are a little bit different and really require us to think through, how to respond to those issues, because they're either layered or, like I said, very complicated. Many issues HR deals with daily involves compliance. And it's either at the root of the issue or it's certainly somewhere woven as a very strong thread between the various aspects of the particular problem that the employer is dealing with. With compliance, the boundary is really defined by law, rule, regulation, or policy, and adherence is mandatory. Ethics, though, involves sometimes or most of the time a judgment, making choices about conduct that reflect values. So right and wrong, good and bad, words like integrity, transparency, and honorable behavior typically crop up. So ethics are morals, beliefs, integrity, conscience, moral code, and values. And we know how interesting those can be day to day.
They definitely get a little more gray and fuzzy compared to the legal side of it for sure. Could we talk through some of the more common reports that we get and then maybe move on to some of the more complicated?
Sure, I'll try my best.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So let's start with I have a member that we were discussing an upcoming class with, and they were a manufacturing organization. Like many organizations, they were still predominantly white men, and they were struggling with how to deal with an incident that had recently occurred. So they had had a celebration dinner, like the team had gone above and beyond. They had hit all their numbers. Production was great. They were exceeding where they needed to be. So they had a celebration dinner for the entire team. And it turned out that one of the team members was Muslim and it was during Ramadan. So this is a time of fasting, and a fellow employee didn't understand Ramadan and commented in front of the other team about the employee not eating. There was some joking that happened about like an upcoming date and trying to lose weight and look better for, their new girlfriend. And the whole team thought it was hilarious, and everybody, including the manager, was laughing. The team kept bringing the employee plates of food to encourage him to eat, and it was good natured, but it isn't something that really sat well with the employee. So from a perspective of, looking at it as ethical, like what should we have handled differently here? What should there have been happening that didn't happen in this situation?
Wow. Well, a couple of things come up. And since we have a number of things we want to talk about today, I'm going to just try to hit some of the main surface areas or points. I really recommend, excuse me, that this organization consider looking at a more diverse workforce if their manufacturing is predominantly white male. So that would be certainly a key. And is that compliance or ethical? Well, probably both. They want to review their harassment policy and assure that they provide harassment training at the very minimum. But, joking is one of those main causes of either a misunderstanding, an argument, or discrimination, harassment, bullying. Joking can get people very seriously in trouble. This particular example has its main root, in my opinion, in the culture of the organization, a lack of respect and understanding, as well as training. Had the individual even been a white male and not eating, this type of joking could have easily been an issue under the American Disability Act for an eating disorder. So the manager really should have known better, to be perfectly honest, and should have stopped the harassing immediately, maybe even addressed the issue right then with a follow-up discussion that should take place. There's lots to go through in that particular scenario. I think overall we could say, was that a smart thing to do? Was that a right thing to do? Was that a ethical thing to do? And the answer is no. And I think we all would probably agree with that. And then as we move on in, what are those particular compliance issues that then would face this employer?
Yeah, and I have to say, I hear the joking all the time. Like, so it's, oh, well, somebody was just teasing or they were telling a joke and like they didn't mean any harm and things like that. So I feel like that one is a recurring theme that we hear, and it's particularly challenging because it feels like it's in good nature and spirit and camaraderie, and it accidentally steps over bound lines that people just don't understand. Like, so um yeah, I
Well,
agree with you.
Kirsten, what's really important about that, I mean to interrupt you. We talk about joking often in one-on-one coaching, and I'm sure in many of your trainings, and I certainly do on the one-on-one conversations I have daily with members, is if you and I have a relationship where we joke and we may even have some kind of funny name for each other, if we're in the presence of other people, it may be fine for you and I, but we have to consider those other people that come into the conversation. So if we're in a break room or in an office and we're talking loudly and what we may say may be offensive to someone, that's another place joking gets you in trouble. So you and I may be fine, but the other person listening, that may not be fine.
Right. We never know exactly where somebody is at or what things might be offensive to them. So that's
Absolutely.
a really good observation. So, all right, well, let's talk through another example. So this one I thought was really interesting because this one has to do with the pandemic and return to office policies. So one of the HR contacts that I work with had just changed companies and had experienced some challenges recently. So she was remote, like many of us. Like, we started a new job. I know I joined Catapult, during the pandemic, and they had recently got called back into the office. So throughout the pandemic, she was great. Stellar performance reviews, hit her KPIs, she got promoted, everything seemed to be perfect. But when they returned to the office, things started to feel just a little different, and it really kind of took her by surprise. Um, she got a lot of comments that she hadn't gotten before about her uniqueness, and it didn't really feel like it was a compliment. It turns out that her pandemic activity was actually doing a full leg sleeve of tattoos on her both legs. And so nobody knew. So the first time anybody figured it out was when she returned to the office. And then all of a sudden, her manager is making comments about how odd it is, and coworkers are asking if she had a thing for pain. And eventually, she actually just got let go because she didn't match the culture of the organization. So she feels like it's probably related to like what they didn't know about her when they were remote and not performance. But she's just trying to figure out, as she moves into her next role, how should she handle things differently going forward? What could she do?
Yeah. So, we have an excellent performing employee who's been remote. Comments to this employee that are not perceived as favorable or complimentary, regardless of how they were meant, is a problem. So we really have no reason for employees to be commenting on other employees' appearance of that individual, whether it's to what some would think an extent of full sleeve, leg, arms, neck, head, whatever it might be, tattoos, or something maybe smaller in scale than that. We just really have no reason, let me say that again, for employees to be commenting on people's appearances. If an employee's appearance, presents an issue in regard to professionalism or in regard to your dress code, there are some dress codes for particular industries that may say, hey, if you have tattoos on your arm, we need to have, long sleeves on. We won't get into all of those specific little details, but it could be possible maybe in particular industries. The supervisor or HR should immediately discuss with that employee in private, setting expectations. When the manager comments on how odd an employee looks, I mean, if we just think about, anyone saying that someone looks odd, I think we all kind of know that that's just not appropriate. It's not something we should or would say to someone. We're really in deep trouble at that point from a cultural standpoint, and then we move into likely a harassment standpoint. Employee comments are out of line, and this employer is really headed for an EEOC claim, for which they will lose. When the organization let her go, that of course has added to the value of the complaint, and this now former employee is likely definitely going to file. So we went from a great employee that no one saw to bringing in an employee that just may have a difference in appearance, that the culture, supervision, management, I'm not real sure whom all employees have allowed to bully or harass because of looking differently. And you can take that and expand that in a much broader area that still creates those same kind of problems. So big issues here. I think, if you think about having little children with you somewhere and a child is staring, they may not have ever seen, for instance, I'm just using this as an example, another child or an adult in a wheelchair who may be having certain apparatuses that are life sustaining for them. And one of the first things I think everybody listening would probably say is, turn around, we do not stare at people. We don't do that. And so if we just take what we say to children in that regard, we would hope most people would, and we're trying to teach them something, same kind of things happening here. Why are we staring at this person who has a sleeve? We may want to ask questions like, hey, do you mind me asking about that tattoo? That's really lovely. I've thought about getting one. You really got to be real careful about where we're headed in that conversation. So a lot of things, again, to unpack in this one, but that's going to end up in a serious problem, and very likely, I'd be willing to bet, will cost money for that company.
Yeah, well, and my daughter happens to be in a wheelchair part of the time, and I can tell you she gets lots of stares and everything like that. And actually, she prefers if somebody talks to her about it, like, or asks if a little kid does, because that way she can answer the questions versus staring. But there is a line, right? Like, I mean, it's like you can say like, oh, what happened, or something like that, or like a little kid can ask many more things than an adult could. But there's certainly a line where it feels like, okay, we have now crossed over. Like, if you're asking how lovely it is, or, where did you get it, or something like that, compared to do you like
You look
paint?
odd.
There's
Yeah,
like, right, like there's a line that we are crossing very quickly there. So I'm
absolutely.
curious, when you say like people should never comment on each other's appearances, like, does that mean that, like, my team happens to be all female, and certainly people give each other compliments all the time about, you got a haircut or a new pair of earrings or something like that. Is that okay? And it's just when it gets excessive, or you just really have to gauge who you're talking to more than anything else?
Great question. Um, of course, it's okay when we have something nice to say to each other. It's oftentimes, I would have to say it's the way in which it's said. So it may be a compliment coming from you and I. Gosh, I love the color of that blouse. Where did you get that? That color looks really nice on you. That's fine. Versus, whoo, you are looking mighty fine today. And then that goes on into something else. And everybody who kind of just chuckled, just like Kirsten did and I did, who's listening, you already know what path we could take going down that. So it doesn't have to be a member of the opposite sex. So I was working very hard and trying to figure out, hey, how do we say that? But the bottom line is you can certainly make a compliment. You can certainly tell somebody, I don't know how we get along without you, et cetera. Nice complimentary things are wonderful. We all want to hear those. If we start going down a path of that having more suggestive meanings, we've gone too far.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to convince the folks that I work with not to be kind to each other and recognize when people are doing above and beyond. We have days where people will do a full work attire, even if they're remote. And it's always a lovely moment for everybody, because being able to recognize the effort that has been put in is kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That outfit looks really nice. Have you
Yes.
noticed how tight it is and how many curves that shows on you? Well, you're probably headed down a path we don't want to go down.
Right. Nope. Not even remotely something that we would say to each other. So, all
Exactly.
right. Well, let's talk about outside work, because I think this one gets tricky, because I think right now, especially, we hear so much about how people are struggling to meet bills, and they're looking for ways to augment their current salary with outside work. Um, so just last week I was talking to a member, and we were talking about somebody in their marketing department who wanted to start their own marketing consulting business. And they were just looking to make a little bit more money. And it wasn't that they were trying to take on the business or anything like that, but it was uncomfortable because they were targeting a similar audience, right? So that as a sole practitioner, like, they're not going to have the same capability as a large organization or anything like that, but it still felt like they're kind of fishing in the same pond, and they had a non-compete. But it really talks about working for another formal company, not necessarily going out and doing gig work. So just kind of fuzzy on, like, does the non-compete cover gig work? Does it not? Is it okay because they're so small? Like, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Um, I think in this situation, overall, whether it's ethical, whether it's wrong, or what we might want to call it, it's probably not going to be good for the employer's business. It seems to be headed down a path not to be. There's a conflict of interest here. and a confidentiality, non-disclosure, and non-compete, I believe would be in jeopardy. My recommendation when it comes to a non-compete is the organization would want to reach out to an employment law attorney to review the non-compete, have a discussion then, the employer would, with the employee, that this is either not going to work for the organization, or we need to talk about how we're going to work this out. But I think overall, the answer is no. And for all of those reasons that we just talked about, confidentiality, non-disclosure. If they want to go out on their own and have a business, but swimming in that same pond in many reasons can get people in trouble. Again, is it ethical? I have a favorite line, and I'll probably say this again, it's all fine till it's not fine. So if we all agree, hey, we want to help you to make some more money, well, that's wonderful, but it won't take very long for that to cross over into you're infringing on our business and taking away some of our business. So I see that as a problem.
Yeah, very different if you're doing the same thing that you do professionally for an employer versus if you are, say, I'm going to go babysit or, sell toys on the side or something like that.
Absolutely. And as we've talked, there's a lot of aspects of this that are ethics, and then a lot of aspects that are compliance. And many organizations have voluntarily adopted codes of ethics that describe their general value system, ethical principles or specific ethical rules. Codes of conduct may cover a variety of subjects, such as compliance and laws, confidential or proprietary information, conflicts of interest, or use of company assets. All of those things typically fall in line under the same thing that we're talking about.
That's really helpful. So now this is my all-time favorite. And this is one where I know, but I also know how slippery this slope is, and that is when you're friends with a vendor, right? So I develop great relationships with my vendors that I work with for years. We go out to dinner sometimes and things like that. But in this particular instance, the manager was a friend with a vendor who was bidding on a new product. And they've always spent time together on the weekends. And recently they went to the beach with their friend who's the vendor rep. It happened to be the week that the proposals came in. And it felt like the timing was just off, right? So pre-existing friendship, long-term relationship, but also this work thing going on kind of gets a little fuzzy, right? Because do I have to get rid of my friend? Or can they just not bid on the project? What if they're the best vendor? What do we do?
You're absolutely right, Kirsten. And I'd say absolutely that manager is not likely to end a friendship. So upper management is going to have to think about, hey, what are we going to do about this? Ethically, that manager comes forward and says, hey, one of the vendors is my best friend, just need to let you know that. That's a good ethical thing to do. Management then is likely going to need to think about removing that manager completely from the bidding process, just to assure that if that vendor is selected, that they choose responsibly and could defend why that vendor was selected. Let's say somebody else comes up and creates a problem. That type of situation may or may not be, one of ethics, but the perception would definitely be in the eye of the beholder, and likely only be able to see a manager as a friend who is giving favoritism and who is being given opportunities that are financial in the favor of the vendor. So you definitely want to start out early, and that manager saying, hey, it's a friend of mine, I need to remove myself from the process. And then the company goes, they may pick that vendor, and they may have a reason for picking that vendor. And if it's the best price, the best this, the best turnaround, whatever all of that is, that's their defense if somebody has a problem with it.
Well, and I think having the criteria that you just mentioned, where you can point to this is the criteria and here's how they excuse themselves from the process, totally would clear that one up. Perception is oftentimes kind of the reality, is what it feels like, and I know that there's a lot of dialogue sometimes in organization about favoritism. So this is a recurring theme that we have for our anti-harassment, respect and responsibility classes, where somebody will contact us and say, like, we need training, we need to make sure that everybody is treated equally. We're getting complaints that managers are favoring somebody. And they seem to favor one employee over the other. Sometimes it's, there's a merger and the manager worked with half the team at their company before and now it's a larger team. Sometimes it's, they are buddies and they hang out on the weekend. And I've heard all kinds of different things about favoritism. I've heard, they get the best assignments. They listen to them more than anybody else. They only let that person be their backup on vacation. They're nicer to them. They take them out to lunch more often. But these all feel really hard to pin down, right? Like, so it's one of those that if it was like only one person's getting a raise or only one person is, getting a bonus, it's black and white. It's very clear, right? Like we know, okay, there's something kind of funny going on there. But when it's just sort of like a feeling that they like somebody better, how do we deal with that?
Well, thanks for that, Kirsten. You're right. It's a big, big concern. But you know what? Favoritism is probably really part of our human nature. So we know that a widespread practice of favoritism can and will have a significant impact, whether you're the victim or whether you're the VIP. So people enjoy working with their friends, which often inadvertently turns into favoritism. It can start as something as simple as you were saying, being included on a lunch outing where business is being discussed, and may lead to something much more substantial, like getting salary and promotional benefits. Wanting to work with people that you like, as long as it's fair to other employees, is fine. It's like the old familiar teacher's pet from grade school. One or more employees are chosen to handle the better or the more senior, higher, sorry, something popped up on the screen, higher visibility issues. And it makes others who are equally or more qualified feel as if the manager is not playing fair, or the supervisor or whomever it is. Favoritism can be fairly benign in some situations, but it can also be much more serious and develop even into a hostile work environment for others. As I said, it's human nature. We start out with a favorite toy, and we grow from there. So when a manager assigns a critical, high profile project to one individual, he or she hopefully selects the best person for the job. But when it's given to a friend in the office with the best view based on other criteria, that's going to cross over into favoritism. So kind of like we were just talking in that last situation, what's that criteria? How did we determine? Is it always that same person? And what are we doing to help other people develop further into having the skills so that they have that project the next time? It can be healthy for management to favor and reward an employee who's always willing to collaborate and offer up real solutions. I mean, if that's looked as favoritism, then okay, but it's really acknowledging someone's input. It can motivate employees to deliver better results. But when that manager, as we said, favors someone in the office without real merit, there may be serious consequences. It's really important, I think, for employees to distinguish favoritism from performance recognition. That's something important to keep in mind. Not treating everyone equally. A manager is fostering a sense of resentment and separation, and that demotivates employees. It damages the team. We know what recruiting and retention and engagement's like these days. Also, by focusing attention on particular employees, it's easy to overlook, as I said, those growth opportunities and really unique skills, and skill sets that others really do offer. So there's also a chance that the employer can lose good people, and we don't want that happening. And if they feel that their talents go unnoticed, they're probably not going to wave their arms and say, hey, you're showing favoritism and I'm looking at leaving. They just come forward one day and give a resignation, and sometimes it's too late then. So unearned favoritism, just the last couple of things here on this one, as apparently we both like this topic. It also leads to unselected believing that your efforts aren't going to be recognized fairly, and that the yardstick for success has nothing to do with your performance. It only has to do with whether you're liked or not liked by the manager. So I think my last words would be managers want to consider all of these things when they interact with employees and when they assign projects, and it should be about merit. It's okay to have somebody that's a friend, but everybody needs to be treated as equally as possible. I know that's not always possible, but certainly needs to have merit, and again, need to be able to defend why I got the last 4 projects and you only got 1. Need to work with you so that you can get the next couple ones.
Well, and I love that you're saying that the manager owns a piece of this to talk to the other employees. Like, I think that that is one of the critical things right now that we try and train people on in our Management Advantage program is to understand your role as a leader is to develop other people. It is not just to supervise their tasks and activities, it's also to help them define their future and grow and thrive. And sometimes that means having a tough conversation if it's, well, how come you always give Tom the choice assignments and I don't get it? Well, let's look at what Tom is doing and then let's talk about like what you could do and like where your skills are or where I've seen your skills and where you might have opportunity to grow and how can we actually find ways to help you grow into that. So great conversation could come out of a moment where there's a perception of favoritism if somebody has a conversation, because it gives you a chance to say like, oh, well, when you're doing these things, it makes me think that you're not engaged or you don't want to do these growth opportunities. And here's how you could do something differently in the future that would make a huge impact on the group.
Exactly, Kirsten, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about nobody's favorite topic. So if favoritism was our favorite, I would say reduction in force is probably our least favorite, at least for me. And this one is about that using the reduction in force that might be happening because supply issues are there. You can't actually produce your products as much as you need to. So your market share is lower, you're not bringing in the revenue. It is just one of those hard decision moments where you're going to have to reduce the team down a little bit. Sometimes those moments, there are awkward conversations because it's not just let's find the person who is the one that needs to leave because on the production line we don't need them as much, but it's let's talk about it based on salaries or age or people who are not performing up to standard but may not be on a performance plan, or people who may not drive results with a smaller team. Either they're sick or they might have kids at home. They might be perceived as lazy. Is it okay to use a layoff, a reduction in force, as a way to actually cut people who may have been protected otherwise?
Well, my initial answer to that is no, absolutely not. Okay, and so then for people out there whose ears might have just perked up about that, um, the most important part of a reduction in force is documenting your process, because the process, if done correctly, does not carry with it really typically judgments, morals, and ethics. The employer wants to use this process to eventually get to which are the individuals that are now going to be affected. So the process has to have integrity, and the reason for the layoff needs to be sound and defendable. And that starts with the positions that are affected, not an individual. And once the positions are determined, then you look at individuals and then the criteria that's being used, you apply that. So the criteria, again, is has to be defendable, and it needs to be well documented. At that point, of course, it needs to have integrity. It needs to be ethical. And then you want to assure that the selection doesn't result in any kind of disparate impact or adverse impact. What is that? Well, both disparate impact and disparate treatment refer to discriminatory practices. So disparate impact is often referred to as an unintentional discrimination, whereas disparate treatment is intentional. So we went through our whole process and it's defendable and we got down to these positions because we're losing this client and this group is affected. And so we only need one of each of these and we have 5 in each category. Okay. So that's what we need to do. And what are we going to use to apply? Easiest, best thing, and not that we have to go on a layoff, webinar here, but seniority is, of course, some of the last in, first out. If that's not what we do, and we decide to go through performance, which Kirsten was just alluding to a second ago, then we want to be sure that's been well documented and it wasn't stated as, well, you don't play well with others 2 weeks ago, citing the last 2 years, and you just don't play well with others, instead of something that's objective that we can sink our teeth into. So that's a problem. If you then end up with having done everything perfectly, and everybody that ends up being in the list that you are going to lay off happens to be in a protected class, you're going to want to go back and take a pretty strong look at that, make sure it's defendable. Was it done correctly? Was it done accurately? How does all of that look, etc. So when people start talking about those particular things, I think we really know deep down inside that, let's just take female with babies. Some of the best employees can be people with children. They can be both females and both males. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but so we cannot use that as a criteria or something that happened one time to us somewhere way back. That's not ethical. The process is what will speak to itself, and then you're able to do the appropriate thing, and your layoff shouldn't have problems, and EEOC won't be knocking at the door.
Well, and it sounds like this is where, as managers, we need to really rely on HR's guidance more than ever. Like I know for any reduction in force processes that I've gone through, they have been heavily engaged. And, I think back on it and I'm like, man, I actually think they could have even been more engaged on certain things for me, like to make sure I didn't step on any toes, because I would have never thought of certain things even being protected class as a manager, 20 years ago or something like
Sure.
that. So um, when in doubt, we always tell our managers, if it ever is something that you're not sure about, you should ask. Go to HR. Like that's the best thing than make your own decision.
Absolutely.
So all right. So let's talk about salary and hourly. How about that? So recently a member is working through some changes. They did a comp study, and as part of that, they're making some alignment adjustments. But one of the things that they're experiencing right now is high demand. So it's putting a financial burden on the organization because of overtime. So because there's a comp study project going on, the plant manager has decided, hey, can I just change all of my hourly people to salary? Because we're going through this process and I could use that as a moment to then reduce some of my overtime and not have the kind of financial expenditure that I'm having right now. Can we leverage that moment to do something like that? Or is that not okay?
It's not okay. So, let me first of all say that it seems sometimes when we talk in the compliance world, okay, which keep in mind are laws, which HR did not write, but are there to try to help as a business partner, help keep a business in line, help go, okay, here's our risk, here's our liability, what are we going to do, can't we do? There may be some things, not this, that we can try to do. How can we limit the overtime? What kinds of things can we do to cut cost or look at this, financial burden? So we can't just arbitrarily pick a position and classify it based upon a job title or overtime or, any of those aspects. There's a duties test and a salary test that helps determine the proper classification. So when your HR individuals, come to you and start talking to you about that, and it feels like maybe they're typically saying no or putting up their hands, speaking from my whole HR world and career, what they're trying to do is say, hey, this can get us in trouble. So let me help you with how this can get us in trouble. Jobs are either salaried exempt, meaning they're exempt from overtime regulations, or they're hourly. And if they're hourly, then overtime is paid for all hours worked in a single work week over 40 hours, and that's hours worked. That could be a whole nother, webcast. Changing a job classification for financial purposes may be something that an organizational decides to try and rationalize due to the stresses of the finances. I get that. I mean, we've all been in business, and we understand that sometimes it's a bottom line, and how are we going to do that? And a lot of stress put on people who are in those upper positions trying to make those decisions. When DOL is contacted, they would be, and comes into audit, the cost is going to be so much higher to the organization than any overtime they would have ever paid. When DOL comes in to take a look at that, they're going to use a test. And a test, you can go out and look at it on DOL's site. It's a great website where you can ask questions, but there are certain duties and a salary component, and both of those have to be met. And if they aren't, the position is hourly. Everybody could be hourly. Everybody cannot be salary exempt, and everybody meaning positions. FLSA just really has a clear path for proper classification. And when employers wrongly classify, exempts, they may be held liable for all unpaid overtime owed to that employee, going back as far as 3 years to the date of the claim. All of a sudden, that overtime for those couple of weeks is looking a whole lot better.
It looks a lot better.
Yeah. In addition, the court can levy penalties against the employer in the form of liquidated damages in an amount equal to the sum of unpaid wages that the employee is owed, effectively doubling the amount of unpaid wages the employee may recover. So, furthermore, employers who willfully and repeatedly misclassify employees as exempt are subject to up to $1,000 in civil penalties for each violation, and can be criminally prosecuted, which would expose them to up to $10,000 worth of fines, incarceration, let alone what that does to the reputation of the organization. So I'm not an attorney. Let's get that real clear. We have two fabulous attorneys as a Catapult member, where you can talk with attorneys about legal issues under your membership with Catapult. What I'm trying to tell you is it's not just as easy as saying, hey, let's flip this position. Maybe really with good intentions to save money, it creates serious problems. And misclassification, which we could throw in independent contractors in there, just really creates some financial responsibilities for that employer.
Well, and that list of everything that could go wrong was a pretty long list. So that just says to me, I would never try it. And if I ever were needing to try it, I'm going to call you first and say, like, hey, who should I talk to make sure this is okay or not okay for these particular jobs, just to have that safety net a little bit more. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So switching gears completely, let's talk about an office flood, right? So if a hot water heater breaks and the office is flooded and somebody slips and falls and sprains their ankle, can a manager request not to use workers' comp and to use their petty cash fund okay if the employee is all right with it? So if, the manager says it's okay, the VP says it's okay, the employee says it's okay, it's not a huge injury or anything like that, like, they're just going to have to go and get a brace and maybe a set of crutches, they'll still be able to come in and do their job. Can they avoid workers' comp altogether and just pay for it directly? Sort of like I would if I got in a fender bender and didn't want State Farm to know.
Great example. I know that it happens in some very small, what would appear to be insignificant issues, but I certainly don't recommend it. This issue can, really go down a rabbit hole quickly, but in general, there are a number of reasons why the ethical nature and the message that you send to your employees about workplace accidents is huge. Okay, so You get hurt, we're not going to do workers' comp. Well, how will they know? You have to always know they will know. Every single person has a confidant. Everyone tells their confidant, and the message is, hey, they asked me not to file a Form 18 under workers' comp. They're just going to pay for my injury. And that spreads like wildfire, either a positive thing or a good thing, but however it's perceived by those employees. But the bottom line is, do not recommend that. When the ankle doesn't heal or further complications come up and the extent of petty cash becomes extremely high, and then the employer says, you know what, maybe I better call workers' comp, they're not going to be happy with you. Let me just make that clear. That goes along with a whole lot of other issues. An employer has an obligation to report the injury immediately to its workers' comp insurance carrier. That's just an obligation. The employee has an obligation to file a Form 18. And again, a whole workers' comp, conversation at some point in time. I'm not necessarily what I consider myself a workers' comp expert, but I can tell you that going down the path of paying petty cash is usually one of those, it's all fine till it's not fine. And then when something else gets worse and we have to have an infection and go in the hospital and, a thumb amputated due to a cut and whatever else it might be, we're in trouble then.
Yeah.
So I don't recommend it.
Yeah. So it sounds like sometimes the rules are the rules for a reason, right? And making sure that everybody understands, why these guidelines have been set and why they are so important to be. There's a recurring theme here, so HR sets the standards, and all of us who are in the manager side, we need to make sure that we understand the respect, the responsibility, the guidelines, the proper behavior, the etiquette, the rules that we need to follow, and make sure that we are compliant with them. So, all right, so one last example, and this one is fairly common for us. So we teach a lot of interviewing for success right now. So what we've discovered in today's world, like everybody's struggling to find the right people, and sometimes a living, breathing body is good enough, and then they come on the job and they actually aren't good enough. So we're doing a lot of training on interviewing for success right now. And one of the questions that has come up in the class is, what is okay to search about a candidate before you interview them? So, for example, we had somebody in our class who has a fake account. So they can go in and they can look at somebody's LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook without being obvious as to who's looking, right? So it's like having an anonymous account or using an anonymous browser, I guess, or something like that. So you can go and kind of like find out, like, is this person going to fit in, not fit in? What do they like, not like? Do I really want to talk to them or not? It's all out there in the public. Like, you put it out there, everybody hears, like, I warn my kids, they're 15 and 11, like, it's out there for the rest of your life. Don't do anything stupid. People are going to look it up. Is it okay to do that before you interview a candidate? I mean, literally, I had somebody bring up 10 years ago, 15 years ago in one of my job interviews, something that was out on the internet about me that I didn't even know. And they asked me about it during an interview. Like, is that okay? Fair game because it's on the internet?
I would say that alarms are going off in my head. The first one that's always concerning as we speak about ethics is we have a manager with a fake account, ethics, looking into social media accounts, and then we're making assumptions, likely, and judgments about things that have nothing to do with the job in most cases, okay? If we need a fork truck operator, let's just say, we're probably not in their Facebook account if we can get in it. That's a whole nother subject. They're not looking to see if they have pictures of that person properly performing forklift duties. Let's just go with that. That candidate could be fake, could have been hacked. We know that happens. The accounts lack reliability. Social media is not the most reliable source for information. Do people look at it? Absolutely. To look at LinkedIn, Instagram, anything they can get to and look at. You certainly don't want to, and probably don't have enough time to get into this, but you sure don't want to be asking employees or applicants the ability to get in their accounts. That is a serious issue. That's a legal issue, let alone an ethical one. So we're going to assume that people are looking at these because there are either some public information out there, and they can just go out and look, even though they're using a fake account. It it really doesn't inform the employer of the candidate's criminal record or any personal information that the employer may need to be aware of, but the candidate may be concealing. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find that. So can an employer use social media in various ways to screen applicants? I would say yes. Employers might look to corroborate information provided by a candidate, review writing samples, or to learn more about a candidate's personal attributes, such as how he or she speaks about a current employer, what organizations the candidate follows, thinking more there about LinkedIn, or whether he or she, is bragging about the use of illegal substances and being incarcerated. The information found cannot be used to unlawfully discriminate. And that's important. And that all of that I just said and the social media and everything, it looks about like this, okay? Social media screening can give employers additional insight about a candidate. I get that. Man, we're just being real. But because social media can also provide an employer with information that's not job related and is potentially influencing their hiring decisions, proceed with caution, a lot of caution. I would say that employers should make the decision to use social media for applicant screening with the guidance of an attorney, honestly, and before screening has begun. Certainly you could talk, if you're a member of Catapult, to one of us for the HR advisors to help you through that. We recommend you also use a dependable source, and I am going to give a plug to a fabulous background checking service, which is ours, Catapult. They will legally and ethically provide background information that you need to make the best informed decision about an applicant, not what may or may be out there that somebody else was able to post, hack, not even theirs. Maybe theirs is a fake one. It's just really very gray, messy. I recommend you stick with questions and issues in regard to the job, so that if you deny that person, you're able to have a defendable reason as to why you did not hire them or that you hired them with all the right reasons.
Sounds like I will stick with the resume and possibly a LinkedIn profile and not go any further than that as the recommendation for the class right now. It's just such a slippery slope, and I think sometimes what you then see online can turn into an interview question, and you've stepped into something that you're not allowed to ask anyway. So you've gone from behavioral based to finding out something personal about them that could be perceived wrong. So this has been so helpful for me, and it really kind of shows me that HR needs to lead is setting the tone for ethics at an organization. So really figuring out like what are those policies, what are their procedures, how are we going to share those standards across the organization. I know we recommend that everybody train at least every 2 years their entire organization on things like anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, workplace laws for their managers, just making sure that you're reinforcing the best standards. A lot of the times we incorporate the organization's policies and procedures into it, but really having your ethical expectations documented, defined, and being able to support them sounds like such a key aspect of HR. So thank you, Renee. I really appreciate this.
Oh my goodness, you're welcome. And all of those things have all kinds of little tentacles. So, when we talk about that and it's a particular issue that someone has, we try to explore what all of those smaller things are. But the root, I think we've kind of covered those today with those examples.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Renee, Kirsten, thank you so much. I love the scenarios and the examples that you chose to highlight here. I think so many of them were pertinent to our audience and covered really a diverse spectrum of issues and how ethics and the legal complications often intertwine. And so you need to be very careful thinking through that. I'll use this to give a big shout out to Renee and all of our HR advisors at Catapult who provide advice and guidance like this every day to our members. I know many of our attendees are members. Some of you may not be members, but this is the kind of advice and counsel that you can get 24/7 from individuals like Renee who are accomplished and very skilled in their profession. As well as our prepaid legal service, which is a relatively new feature for some of our legacy members and certainly for our new members. What a great service pays for your membership in probably one call. So in addition to our learning and development that Kirsten referenced around compliance and anti-harassment training that's available as well, the benefits of membership on clear display here today in our Thinking Differently series. We had a question that came up during the panel, which was around HRCI credit. And so I'll ask our events team to go ahead and advance our slides so that we can give you an update on the HRCI credit. Today's webinar has been approved for the ethics credit for one HRCI, one SHRM, and one CPE credit. You will be emailed information within the next 48 hours on how to obtain that credit. Like always, we hope that you will join us for upcoming Thinking Differently series. Our next one will be on Tuesday, September 13th. That is focused on workforce development and a unique approach that we've had from some of our members and non-members who have created a consortium to really look at workforce development. So I hope you'll join us for that on September 13th. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention our upcoming HR Leadership Conference. The conference is on shaping tomorrow's professionals and businesses. We have a fantastic agenda that is shaping up that kicks off with a look at the demographic and economic changes that have impacted our labor and workforce pre-pandemic and what that might mean for post-pandemic, as well as some great strategies on how to attract, retain talent. And so that will be an in-person conference in Charlotte at the Marriott in City Center on Thursday, September 29th, followed by a working session on Friday, September 30th, which will be a half-day session. There will also be an awards reception that evening, so we hope you'll join us. If you have any other questions or feedback about our Thinking Differently series, we invite you to email our events team, meeting@letscatapult.org, with any registration questions or feedback for future programs. Kirsten and Renee, thank you for being our guests today, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next month.